Hey everybody, this is Mike, and I am doing the first part of a three-part presentation, and each part builds upon each other, and each part is like really kind of has a lot of detail. There's a lot to kind of unpack, and so I'm breaking it up into three. And so this first one, and the purpose of these three is to provide a little bit more perspective of what is happening right now. A lot of the previous videos I've done, particularly as of late, has to do with, what's happening right now and just some perspectives on that. And this is going to be like maybe a step or two back to understand it, and it's going to build. And where I hope to go with this is, once we lay out what is kind of occurring, then, maybe some different solutions or options become evident. So that's my intent for it. Today's presentation is going to be primarily focused upon the Age of Aquarius, the precession of the equinoxes, and all of that sort of stuff. A little bit of the Mayan calendar as well. And the second video, or the second presentation, is going to be more so about a lot of the previous research I have been doing for the last 4 years, which is the Susquehanna mystery, because it ties in exactly to, so much of what we're experiencing. But to really understand how significant it is, we first need to understand this, this calendar system, if you will, which is used by the folks that set the field or set the game, or setting the rules. So in order to really understand what's going on, you gotta understand what the rules of the game are. And even if you are familiar with a lot of like astrotheology and astrology in general, I think there's going to be some new stuff in here which you have not seen or maybe thought about before, but so I encourage you to watch this video. And then secondly is, astrology doesn't resonate with everyone. And I understand why, and I can appreciate that at least, but it's important that you understand the basics, regardless of what your personal thoughts are or opinions are. And the reason why I say that is because the people who are playing this game, so the people who are the rule makers, if you will, of this game, this is very important to them. And well, how do we know that? Is let's start right here. This is just a picture I have taken from a book, my own personal book, so I'm not certain. I don't have it with me, and I don't know the title. I think it's a I'll try to get that in the notes. It's like the Masonic, it's a Masonic book, and someone asked, I saw asked me if I was a Mason. This is a side note right now, on a comment from a previous video, and no, I'm not. I'm not a member of any secret organization or club or anything like that. No. But so this is a book which was written by a Mason, and it's a photographic book of all of the Masonic symbology throughout Washington, D.C. And it's fascinating. It's very, very well done. But within Washington, D.C. are a bunch of known zodiacs. And, let's start off with this one right here. We can see this photo is taken from the Constitution Avenue entranceway of the Federal Reserve Building. And so what we have here, this is from the doorways, and this is etched in glass, and you can see that there are the 12 signs of the zodiac, right when you walk into the Federal Reserve. Obviously this is significant. Why else would it be there? But it's not just the Federal Reserve. We see that throughout Washington, D.C. This is the National Academy of Sciences. And we see the zodiac. It looks like it's in wrought iron here. This is Federal Triangle. We can see the zodiac again right here. This right here is the zodiacal signs on the floor of the Great Hall of the Library of Congress. And so astrology is a bunch of things. And a lot of times when people think about astrology, they're thinking about it in terms of its subjective, its subjective meaning. Aries means this, or Mars means this, and and the interpretations. But there is an objective quality, which is also associated with astrology, and at the very, 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 very least, this objective quality is taken very, very seriously by those that that rule your world, our world. And the first and foremost purpose of astrology is it's a calendar, it's a timepiece, it is a clock. Here we see this a picture, Bracken House. I want to say that's it's in London. Maybe it's like the headquarters of one of the newspapers, one of the media. So it's astrology is about timing, or at least that's one part of it. And so, this here is a kind of like a snapshot, if you will, a two-dimensional picture of at least how outer space in the solar system is presented to us. And here's a side note, particularly a side note as it relates to flat Earth. That's not my hot button. I find the topic very, very interesting, but and I've seen a lot of the research, research as it relates to it. But I personally don't have an opinion right now, because it seems to be more of a divisive mechanism, and I don't really understand what for me personally, what the value is in terms of if flat Earth is an accurate description of the plane of our reality, which the evidence certainly points to some really different stuff. But that is the case, that's going to have an impact in terms of this model and how we think of astrology. So I just want to point out that plays into it, but and I don't really have any comments on that right now, but I'm going to go and explain this the way that it has been presented to the mainstream collective mind, and to the nature of the physical layout of our reality. And so what we have here is we've got the sun, and then this just shows the earth, and the earth going around the sun. But the truth of the matter is we could think of all of the planets going around the sun. And then what we have here, these are the constellations that make up the zodiac. And what you can see is that it encompasses or encircles the entire solar system. This backdrop of stars. These are moving from our perspective on Earth. They rise and fall throughout the year, and they change. What stars we see in the heavens. But what doesn't change is their position relative to one another. And so what happens is the planets, we're calling them planets, but the truth of the matter is you've got white dots in the sky which move, and white dots in the sky that don't move. That's the most basic way of thinking about it. And that's an objective reality. I'm seeing it, you're seeing it with our eyes. Maybe it's up to debate what we're actually looking at, but we are all looking at the same thing, which is moving dots, which are for the most part the heavenly bodies, excluding the sun and the moon. They're a little bit different, but everything else, from Mercury to Saturn, these are the heavenly bodies which are visible from the with the naked eye, and they are seen to move against this backdrop of fixed stars. Now keep in mind that there are theoretically infinite stars in this backdrop, And these constellations, however, whomever like decided these are the constellations, what they do is they represent a particular place in the heavens. And this is circular, it loops back on itself. This is the snake eating its tail. And, theoretically it could be broken up into infinite ways, but the nature of astrology shows it broken up into 12 pieces. The 13th sign completely changes the nature of astrology in terms of how it's interpreted. 12 signs creates a certain understanding or filter for understanding the heavens, and that's based upon 12 and 60, that particular ratio. And it's all about like duality and oppositions. Astrology is when we break up the heavens into these 12 pieces, as soon as you do that, as soon as that was done, it becomes an artificial or a subjective reality placed upon the objective, which is like, yeah, there are a bunch of dots up in the skies, and it can be broken up in any different ways. So the reason I'm pointing that out is I want to say that there is more to our nature of living on Earth and seeing our environment than just like this astrological perspective. But that being said, the astrological perspective, my experience has brought great value and understanding into reality, for whatever mysterious reason it seems to work. But then two, it's very, very important to know it, just to understand the logic of the people who make the rules of your life and your reality. So, okay, let's go back to this being a timekeeper. So you got this is our fixed backdrop right here of the stars. And then, let's say right here is Saturn. And Saturn, let's say right here, let's say this is 20 degrees Libra. That's Libra right there. So 20 degrees Libra suggests or points to a very specific part of the heavens. When you say Saturn's at 20 degrees Libra, you're saying this is the part looking from Earth. If you look to where Libra is in the sky, where 20 degrees is, that is where you're going to go and find Saturn. So Saturn goes and it orbits around the sun. And it gets kind of confusing because the Earth is moving to, or at least that's the model that we're given. Regardless, they do appear to be moving, but it will take 30 years, what we think of years, for Saturn to return back to the same place. So that is a part of the timekeeping mechanism. Saturn's timekeeping mechanism is 30, or actually 25 and a half years to get back to the same point in the heavens, versus, let's say, Jupiter is at the same point. And I choose Jupiter and Saturn very specifically because we're going to come to that in a little bit. But Jupiter, it will do the same orbit. It will be back at 20 degrees Libra in 12 years. And Mars, that's a little bit more than one Earth year, and then Venus is a little bit less, and the outer planets, they're even more. And it's from this movement, from knowing how long it takes planets to move throughout this backdrop of the heavens, it can work as it works as a calendar. And I say this a lot. In astrology, time is not important. So like the actual, the time it takes to go from one point to another, or to complete a circuit, or to complete a loop. But timing is what really matters, is like, how two things are happening, like, how the different timekeeping mechanisms relate to one another. So each planet has its own timekeeping kind of time frame. And then there's a greater one, a greater timepiece. And this is what we really want to talk about. And this is known as the precession of the equinoxes, and the Platonic year. And, and again, this goes back to this whole sort of like flat earth thing. Like, if that's an accurate description, like, just being open to it. I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't, but if that is open, if that is an accurate description of what our plane of reality is, well, then that changes all this stuff, which I'm going to talk about right now. But the precession of the equinoxes is a time period which is explained as being created, or the effect of what's called the axial tilt of the Earth. So this is the plane of the ecliptic. And so the plane of the ecliptic, imagine it like a record, like an album on a record player. Like that record, all of the planets go around the sun on that same sort of plane, on that same record. And that's what this line represents. So the Earth travels, like in the models which were given of how the solar system works, the Earth travels on this line right here, and it goes around the sun. However, the Earth, as it relates to our north and south, we're actually at an angle. We're not perpendicular. The North Pole, or the top of the Earth, is not perpendicular to this plane. It is off kilter. Off kilter? I don't know. Offline. Like it's a top. It's not spinning perfectly on its axis. It's starting to wobble. And so that's at 23.5 degrees. And that in itself is really significant, but we're not going to get into that. And it is from this this angle which is offset from the perpendicular that creates what's called the wobble of Earth. And what happens is, as the model we're told, is that the Earth rotates on its axis, but then also because its axis is on this strange angle, it's also kind of rotating also, and it creates this wobble. And the point of all of this is very, very slowly, the angle which the Earth looks at these fixed stars, it changes. And that change is what creates the precession of the equinoxes. It's also known as axial precession. So this is, how it's described from, the Wikipedia astronomy explanation. Because you have to realize, like, astronomy and astrology, they began as the same practice, and they were split up like right around the 1600s. Francis Bacon, Royal Society, the death of alchemy, the birth of chemistry, all of this that's when this splitting up happened. But they're linked. And if you are into astrology, it'll serve you to really understand astronomy. If you're into astronomy, I think it'll serve you to understand astrology, because, they are complementary in many ways. But anyway, so the axial precession is a gravity-induced, slow, continuous change in the orientation of the astronomical body's rotational axis. That's this thing right here, because this is wobbling. The way the Earth is relative, its angle to these stars, it changes, and the way we see the stars changes. So in particular, it can refer to the gradual shift in the orientation of the Earth's axis in rotation of a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. All right, so what this means is, in a period of 26,000 years, imagine this like three-dimensionally, like this point, like this goes around too, like it's a wobble of the top of Earth, and that's 26,000 years. And during that 26,000 years, as the Earth is said to go around the sun, it looks like the sun changes where it is located relative to these constellations. And that's why we say, like, oh, the sun is in Taurus, the sun is in Aries, the sun is in Gemini. It is like what the sun appears to be, what the backdrop is in. And so, and that is known as, like, the solar year, and it changes. It goes from Aries all the way to Pisces. And because of the wobble, the change, the same thing happens is the tilt in terms of what it appears the the backdrop of where the Earth is relative to the fixed stars, it changes, and we spend a period of time in facing, if you will, each of these different constellations or pie pieces of the heavens. And basically we see from our perspective on Earth, from our calendar or our day counting system, the sun appears to be roughly like 30 days in each one of these signs. So it spends 30 days moving through here to there, to there, to there. And with the precession of the equinox, this 26,000 year process to go around, it is calculated that we spend 22,160 years in each of these signs, and each period in one of these signs is known as an age. And this is known as the Platonic year or the Great Year. So it's just like a solar year, but it's on a grander scale. And this is a really nice slide right here, because it kind of talks about the numbers associated with the precession, and then these numbers. If you're a numbers person, this becomes very, very, I think is interesting and significant, particularly as it relates to like numerical resonances and stuff like that. But if the precession of the equinoxes is 25,920 years, and to make a 360-degree rotation, it means that we go 1 degree every 72 years, which is what we're told is the lifespan of a human being. So there's all sorts of interesting correlations. But anyway, so all of this kind of build up, here's like another way of depicting this. And this is all just like these are abstracts. I mean, you got to realize that, there seems to be a level that this is real, but then there's also a level is like, I don't know this is true. These time periods are abstract. There's such long periods of time. You're envisioning in your mind these 3D models. And the thing is, we're being told these 3D models from organizations which have a history of telling lies. So it's like, that doesn't mean everything is a lie, but it means everything should be at least taken with a grain of salt. Maybe a little bit more of a less like paranoid sort of way of looking at it is as we grow in our perspective and in understanding, our understanding of the model of reality can change as well. And so, this may be just like this understanding of physical reality may just be reflective of this one particular level of consciousness. Because all of this, like, the big 3-point presentation is about like this change, this undeniable change which is occurring. Like, we are living, no matter how you want to look at it, like right now, April 20th, I think is the date today, or maybe it's the 21st. There's a change in life on Earth. And so we can recognize that as a degree of reality, and we want to understand, or at least I want to understand, and I want to try to be able to explain, is greater perspectives of changes and what is being manipulated and what's not being manipulated, because that's where we're going today, is like how this is being manipulated, how this is being gamed, if you will. So, okay, so we've got this. We talked about this great slide, and we have the different constellations. We've got 2,160 years, and these are known as ages. So the astrological age is, if you're familiar with astrotheology, I'm just kind of going over the basics here, and we're going to go somewhere, but I want to start on a level where we're all kind of have the same perspective, or at least how I'm going to be explaining this coming from the same perspective. So an astrological age is just like, if you say like your sun is in Aries, and Aries has certain qualities, and we tie that to the individual. the same is said about ages. And an age, a 2,160-year period, has a certain expression or quality relative to what Aries is said to be. And so again, remember, I said that all of this astrology, particularly the 12 sign duality based, like, and when I say duality, because astrology, 12 sign astrology, is all built upon oppositions, every sign having its opposite, yin yang, the masculine, the feminine, how the different elements work, like everything is oppositional. If it was done in a different model, like, that goes out the window. If you've got like 13 signs, guess what? You don't have, and it's broken up into 13 equal pieces, you don't have opposition anymore. You've got a different ratio. You've got kind of a Mayan ratio, to be quite honest, because the Mayan system is 1320 ratio as opposed to 1260. If that makes sense to you, know what I'm talking about. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. But we are going to talk a little bit about the Mayan calendar because it ties in. So, okay, so we've talked about the astrological ages. And so astrological ages, like, this is like a general, this breaks it down. So generally speaking, in our Western calendar system, we see the year zero, if you will, is said to be the beginning of the age of Pisces. And the age of Pisces ties in very much with, like, when looking at culture from an astrological perspective, an astrotheological perspective, like the age of Pisces, it ties in with the time period of Jesus. And so we see that, like, with the Pisces symbol with fish and the Jesus symbol of the fish, which is really the Vescio Pisces, or at least it correlates that with it. And, like, there's all these different sort of correlations. And so we've got, like, Pisces with the fish and begins, like, when Jesus was born. And then we've got the time period before that, the 2,160 period. And that's like Aries, the age of Aries. And, like, in the Bible, you've got, like, Moses coming down, and he blows the ram's horn from Mount Sinai, and that is, like, the symbolic representation of the birth of the age of Pisces. And the reason why he came down and destroyed the golden calf, which all of the Israelites were worshiping, because the golden calf is a representation of the previous time period, that of the bull, the calf, the bull. So they destroy the calf and they blow the ram's horn, and it's the beginning. So this all ties into, like, this, it's not just, it's Western, but it's greater than Western. I'm going to focus on the Western, on the Abrahamic religions, primarily just Judaism and Christianity. But, like, we've got, like, we can see this precession, and in those texts, primarily like the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, all this sort of stuff, we can see, if you know what to look for, all of this astrotheological sort of, like, clues and hints. And again, this is the nature of astrotheology. And if you're watching this and you're like, what, that's all just that, maybe this is not an objective truth in terms of how reality is. But what is objectively true is that the nature of the people who control your world, the Federal Reserve, the Congress, like, this is what they believe and subscribe to. So part of being able, if astrology is something which you are not intrigued by, or it doesn't hold value, that is going to not learn about astrology based upon your own personal interest in the topic, is going to limit your understanding of the game which is being played, because you need to understand their reality, their logic system. And so this is the logic system. And we see it throughout the Bible. We see that through this idea of the apocalypse. We're going to come to that. Like, that's a scary word. But what it means is this moving from one age to the other. That's the apocalypse. That's why Moses came down and destroyed the golden calf. On a side note, I think I was watching a video. I want to say it's by Atlantean Gardens. I can't think of the guy's name. He makes some great videos. But he showed these pictures of statues, and I looked for them. I was just on the internet because I want to include it in these presentations, but I can never find them. But what it showed was there's a theme in history, or at least what we're told of history, of sculptures of showing like a warrior goddess, a Mithras, a liberty goddess, killing the symbol of the previous age. And it's like there's one of her killing like a ram, and one of a bull, and it's this representation of like a marking of the end of an age. And, again, this is why understanding goddess mythology symbology is so significant, because that really plays a big part in terms of the story which is being followed. But that's like, again, like more, if you want to call it proof, or more like signs that this is the system in which the rulers, the writers of life on Earth, this is what they follow. So what we are interested in is Pisces into Aquarius. And you see this right here. It says that that the age of Aquarius begins in the year 2160. So that's 140 years from now. And that's part of like what all of this seems to be about. I've seen a lot of different analysis of like when the next age begins, and there really isn't, it's not like, from what I've seen or what I've been able to ascertain in my own research, like it really is not a hard science from like when we go from one age to another. And there is a strong kind of like disagreement of like when the age begins. So like right here, we're saying 2160, the year 2160. So when it begins, I've seen other like official claims of it happening earlier, and like the whole thing shifts. But what we can know for certain, so like that's, again, this is abstract, a 26,000 year cycle is beyond our understanding, our point of reference of being in a human form. So it's like we can't take that too seriously, or maybe it's more as an abstract, it's more pliable. But what we can take seriously is the symbology and what is being told to us through the stuff that's here now, and I'll be specific on that in a moment. But let's see, we've got, so we just talked about it. We got the 12 ages, or the 12 ages at 2,160 years. This gives us our precession of the equinox, which is 25,000 years, which is, remember, the axial precession is 26,000 years. And so we're talking about the same sort of thing right here. And at the same time, we're also talking about the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar is tracking this as well. And so where things get a little bit interesting is like, if this is a cycle, like where do you begin and where do you end the different counting, or like, where you're tracking the cycle. And so I want to jump into how this correlates to the Mayan calendar for a second before I get into what appears to be happening, which is this hijacking of the age of Aquarius. That's what's occurring. And I'm gonna 33 minutes to build up like to that point, but that's what this is going to be about. Like, what are the different archetypes that are being played with, and how we're seeing it in like our actual experiential reality, and what is happening right now. So, okay, so Mayan calendar, I'm going to go through this kind of fast, but then we're going to come back to it later. So this here, this stone, this is a symbol of the Mayan long count. This is the Mayan long count calendar. And this was like a really big deal in the collective consciousness because of 2012. Everyone probably remembers that. And it's fascinating, how this whole sort of mind thing came into the collective consciousness and its correspondence with like Terence McKenna and like In Search Of, the TV show from the 70s, and seeing how this was played upon the collective mind within humanity. That's another topic, but just be aware that that's why this is important, the Mayan calendar. It ties up to this precession of the equinoxes, this changing of ages, but it's told a little bit differently, and it also provides insight in terms of what we can expect. Remember, we're told what was told through mainstream sources, like anyone who studied the Mayan calendar a little bit more deeply would be able to recognize the simplification of how the mainstream told it, but nonetheless, how it was told to the mainstream is significant because that creates the collective dream. And this is how you go and you hijack. Creating the collective dream is how you create, how you can create the hypnosis. So anyway, so Mayan calendar. So the Mayan calendar is friggin' awesome because it's just based upon counting. And it's based upon something which we can understand in reality. And that is like the day. Like regardless of like whatever we are experiencing, right? Whether this is a, base reality or simulation reality and like, I don't know, flat earth and sphere earth and like whatever. Like, I don't know, and I don't really care in a certain way. What I care about is like being in this body right now, because if you're just in your head and it's just all abstract, like, I don't know, that doesn't do it for me. I'm a little bit more like, feet on the ground, with my mysticism. So anyway, so the Mayan calendar is all based upon the day, and that's one thing which is arguable. The sun rises, it sets, and the sun rises again. And from sunrise to sunrise, that is one unit. And so you've got like the Mayan calendar, and this is just a simplification of, so this is what this is called. This is the 5 positions of the long calendar. It starts with the day. It goes up to these things right here. A Baktun. A Baktun is 144,000 days. And then this right here, this represents 13 Baktuns. So 13 Baktuns is 144,000 days. And if you have 13 of them, let's see if we have this right here. Where am I looking for? The completion of the 13 Baktuns is the completion of this, and that time period is it's 5,125.36 years. Again, we can see the limitation of a Gregorian calendar versus how a Mayan calendar is different. Each of them has like benefits or, strengths and weaknesses, but this is precision. There's no such thing as a 0.36 year. Like that's not a real thing. However, if you go and you multiply this 144,000 days times, 140 times 5, well then, or times 13, excuse me, you get this number, which is equal to this 12,125.36. Like we can see like how these numbers, this is much more precise than this. Regardless, so this is equal to 1.872 million days, or 5,125 years. So how does this line up to the precession of the equinoxes? So you've got a Mayan calendar, 125,000 years, and then we've got 5 cycles. The reason I chose 5 is because we go right here and we see when you multiply 5 times this number, we get 25,625, which is 98.9%, like in terms of time frame of one precession of the equinox. It's the same friggin' cycle. sliced up a little bit differently. We're slicing it up by I guess multiply 5 times 13. So what is that? That's 5 times 13, 65. So that would be 65 Bach tunes, and that compares to what, like, astrology is going to call these 2,126,000 time periods. But the Mayan calendar, we could see a count of 5 lines up with the wobble of the earth, the precession of the equinoxes. And I think 5 is also interesting because what's significant within the Mayan calendar and with a lot of calendars is Venus. And Venus has this 52-year cycle as well. And Venus corresponds directly with 5, or at least it relates to Earth in a 5 relationship. I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole, but if people who are familiar with the planets from this way, about, like, the 5-pointed star between the cycle of Venus relative to the cycle of Earth. We've got 5 right here. We've got all these different things. Quetzalcoatl corresponds to Venus, and we've got Lucifer as Venus. We've got all of this different stuff, and like some ways they line up, but not even, like, let's not even go down that path. All I want to show is, like, it's corresponding. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because what the Mayan calendar, particularly the 2012 date, represented was the end of the calendar. But it wasn't just the end. It was larger than just like one of these cycles. It was a fifth count. There was a synchronization, and that synchronization is if you ask me, whether you're calling it the Age of Aquarius or you're calling it the fifth sun, whether you're calling it whatever, like, there's a change which is happening. And we're going to talk about that change, and we're witnessing something. At the very least, we're witnessing a hijacking of that. But it is my impression that what we're seeing is a manipulation of it, and there truly is this change occurring right now. So now we're getting into the good stuff. So all of that was just like the lead up to the Age of Aquarius. So the reason why I want to focus on the Age of Aquarius is because this is the organizations, the peoples, the mindset, the consciousness, which has the greatest influence right now on the collective of Earth, is a Western perspective, and that is Western astrology and Aquarius. And so we're going to look at that. So here's some of the signs of, like, hey, the Age of Aquarius is coming. So the musical, I'm not certain what year it came out. I think it came out late 60s. So the song Let the Sun In, let the sunshine in, the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. Have you seen the musical Hair? That was a popular song. I think it was first released by this album called The Fifth Dimension. We're going to come back to Fifth Dimension in a little bit, but this was introduced to the collective, particularly the counterculture, like during this 1960s time period. And so we're seeing this, like, movement in all of these different markers, particularly cultural markers, of moving into the Age of Aquarius. So one way which we can think about it is this like 1960s counterculture movement. And this is where we start to, like, become aware of, like, the dream and the manipulation aspect. Is, like, if you're familiar with Dave McGowan, is that his name? Dave McGowan's work and all of, like, the stuff which looks at the counterculture movement from the 60s, it was completely, like, controlled by the CIA, right? And so, and if you go further, you know that the CIA is a offshoot of the original state-sponsored spycraft, which goes back to John D, 007. And so it's the same organizations, it's the same people. John Dee, Rosicrucianism, the founding of the British Empire, the founding of the United States Empire. It's all the same. It's always been there. So that's why it's so important to understand. When I say, excuse me, when I say always, I'm just talking about like what we're told for the last 400 years. So I'm not saying always, always, always. I'm just saying, like, if you want to understand what's going on now, let's just start in this 400-year time period. So we've got this Age of Aquarius, fifth dimension, and this was very much tied to this like hippie sort of communal, commune living expression of the Age of Aquarius. And the Age of Aquarius, and we're going to get into what that represents, we're going to see it's more complex. It's more complex in its symbology, or it's just complex. More, I'm not going to compare it to anything. So its first kind of definition has to do with like this golden age of humanity. This very like, you know, loving, like we're all one big family and we're sharing this experience and let the sun shine in, and all of like the stuff that the 60s counterculture was really embodying. And you know, as we know, this was a bit of a co-op. You know, this was set up by the CIA. So the 60s was one time period, and in my opinion, you know, this really came to an end, or they shut that down, or the ritual happened with that, with is it the Monterey Pop Festival, where the Rolling Stones were performing, and that guy gets killed in the front by the Hells Angels in front of the stage. You know, this was a snuff film. This time period was the snuff film time period. Like the JFK assassination, that was like, you know, the Zapruder film was a snuff film, and that I can't remember the name of the documentary, but you know, it's pretty famous, you know, and particularly interesting because it was filmed by a then film student, George Lucas, but of the Rolling Stones performing and then seeing this actual murder unfold. And that was right outside of San Francisco, which so much of the counterculture movement was tied into. And it was, you know, that was, here's your death ritual. So let's fast forward a little bit and go through, and I go through this in the videos in the 100-year transition period. Like this all kind of overlaps. But the 100-year transition goes from like the first computer to transhumanism, or to the singularity. And this is being driven by Silicon Valley primarily, and what Silicon Valley represents. And Silicon Valley is, you know, it's very close to San Francisco, and San Francisco is often thought of, you know, it's different than McGowan's work, which focuses primarily down in Laurel Canyon and in the Los Angeles area. But you know, was it the Summer of Love, and like, you know, all of like the Haight-Ashbury, that's what it is. All of that San Francisco sort of stuff. That's, you know, that movement is tied to San Francisco. And then San Francisco then became like, you know, the epicenter of this transhumanism. And this is, you know, what we're going to see is part of this hijacking of the expression of the Age of Aquarius. So the Age of Aquarius is first shown in this communal living sort of way. And that there's a truth to that, because the Age of Aquarius represents humanity as a family. It is thought of as a golden age of humanity because of how like we relate with one another. You know, it is a very like brotherly love, sisterly love, you know, sort of way of being, and not like about war. And so there is a truth to that in one of the archetypes associated with Age of Aquarius. Now, again, I don't know if Age of Aquarius is a real thing or not. All I know is the people that control the world and who set the stage for how life is lived, yeah, they're following it. And so anyway, so Age of Aquarius. So this is only telling one part of the Aquarius archetype, which is this kind of like human family. Another part of the Age of Aquarius has to do with innovation. And innovation can be expressed in many, many different ways. And right now we think of innovation primarily as it relates to computers and computer innovation, and that is our Silicon Valley. So we see how this kind of came to an end really was this ritual right around 1970. 1970 is when the first personal computer came. This is the beginning, where Silicon Valley really began to take off. 77 was a big year. I go into this in other videos, but 1995 is the next major event as relates to San Francisco and the hijacking of the expression of the Age of Aquarius. Because in 1995, two things happened in San Francisco, and I'm not going to go in on the same day, and that was the death of Jerry Garcia, the lead singer of the Grateful Dead, who was the ultimate counterculture band of San Francisco that represented, that particular movement. And then also the IPO of the company Netscape. And the IPO of Netscape was a symbol of the dawn of the age of the internet. So we see where San Francisco went from the city of love to now really of the internet world. It's all connected there, and this is also ties in to the same organizations. That's where Amorc is headquartered. Singularity University is right by the headquarters of the ancient mystical order of the Rosy Cross, which goes back to the same folks, John Dee, Francis Bacon, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, okay. So that's one expression, this Age of Aquarius song. We see how it was presented within popular culture. I've talked about this in other videos, like the 40-year-old virgin. This can be thought of as really, really maybe even lowbrow comedy, but it ain't. But last scene of it, they kind of tell you what this is representing, what the 40-year-old virgin is, and the sacred marriage, and there's so much symbology in that. But the last scene in that movie was they were all dancing, let the sunshine in, Age of Aquarius, the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. I thought this was 2020. I thought that it was supposed to happen in in 2060. It's but is it happening now? It's difficult to tell, but we can see how this is being seeded within the collective culture, and it's being seeded in the same sort of area, and there are these certain ideas which are being put in and tied into this expression of the Age of Aquarius. So I'm talking about, and I keep bringing up the archetypes of Aquarius, And so let's go right here. So traditionally, Aquarius is associated with electricity, computers, flight, democracy, freedom, humanitarianism, idealism, modernization, astrology, nervous disorders, rebellion, nonconformity, veracity, perseverance, humanity, and irresolution. So, again, it's just the Wikipedia explanation, but we can see these are some of the archetypes expressed from that. But if we really want to understand where this comes from, we got to go a little bit deeper. And when we go deeper, we want to look at who are the ruling planets of Aquarius. So Aquarius in astrology, Aquarius represents this part of the heavens. And it is said from the astrological theory that each part of the heavens has a ruling planet or an associative planet. And these planets typically are very similar in terms of archetypical qualities of this particular region of the heavens. So regardless of whether there's truth to this or not, my experience has seen that there's a lot of truth to it, but that could just be because we're living within the system. But nonetheless, so understanding the ruling planets of Aquarius is going to give us more insight into what the Age of Aquarius is said to be. So let's go and look at this. So Aquarius is ruled by Saturn and Uranus. All right, let's begin right there. So there are 12 signs in astrology, and there were, at least in traditional astrology, there were 7 heavenly bodies. You got the sun and the moon, and then you got Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. And those are the only heavenly bodies that are visible without any aid to the human eye. So everything else which is seen in the solar system, you need to have some sort of trickery, whether that's like the optics of a telescope, or whether that is the creative display from NASA. You know, it becomes like a little bit more of an abstract. And so each one of these 7 planets, they were the rulers of the 12 different signs, or there's a correspondence. I like to think of the words correspondence, makes more sense to me. So Saturn was the original ruler of Aquarius. And then when Uranus was discovered, I think it was in the 1800s, Uranus was discovered. And then, like, however this happens, you know, whoever is the governing body of astrology, you know, they're like, okay, Uranus is now that is the ruler of Aquarius. And so now it gets kind of interesting. And now it's understood from a astrological perspective is all of the outer planets. So that's Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They are now considered rulers of signs. So that would be Aquarius, Pisces, and what's the third? What I say? Neptune, Pisces, and Scorpio. They are the higher expression of the ancient rulers of those particular signs. So there is a link between those planetary energies. So what this means is, like, Uranus is the higher expression of Saturn. So this means Aquarius, or the age of Aquarius, or Aquarius type of archetype, has both Saturnian qualities and Uranus qualities. And Saturn and Uranus qualities are said, from an astrological perspective, to be linked. And one is a higher expression. You know, think of it like octaves, and think about like the notes, like, you know, middle C, when you're going up in octaves, it's still C. There's still it still resonates the different C's, but it's a higher expression. And so we can begin to see how they relate, and we can understand like this greater, this very, very wide expression of what Aquarius can be. And so what this means is there is a Saturnian nature of Aquarius, and there is a Uranus nature of Aquarius. And then look what it says right here. Their natures are diametrically opposed. Saturn is the planet of orthodoxy and tradition, and Uranus is the planet of ultra-progressive thinking. So this is where it starts to get interesting, and this is where you can begin like to understand where there is this wiggle room for interpretation. All right, I find this fascinating. So it's, you know, we said the Uranus and Saturn, their natures are diametrically opposed. This is from the astrological perspective. Now, if you go and you look on, like, you know, what NASA, what any of our space agencies tell us, it's like, you know, this is what Saturn looks like. It's a planet with rings, and the rings are kind of horizontal. And then this is what Uranus looks like. It also has rings, but their rings are diametrically opposite from these. They are vertical. So it's like, you know, all of these different sort of clues are like supporting the same kind of like narrative. So, okay, we want to go and look at, you know, here we see many astrologers still consider Saturn to be the co-ruler of Aquarius. So, you know, let's go look at Uranus and what Uranus is said to represent. Because when we think of Aquarius now, and remember we went through all of these these qualities associated with Aquarius, they're really the products of Uranus, because Uranus is said, electricity, lightning, computers, electronic media, technology. Realistically, if you ask me, this is all innovation. The truth is, it's innovation. This is just an expression of innovation. But, this is part of this drumming. We're seeing that. This is part of like the Silicon Valley, because there are other expressions of innovation. We're just seeing it in this computer way. The internet, networking, social media, everything virtual, innovation, invention, social change, political activism, humanitarianism. Aquarius, which is an air sign, but it's called the water bearer, which is very confusing, is about people. Like, so all of this is really, really, it's all over the place. But typically when we think of, or when like in a very, very like quick and easy way of thinking about the age of Aquarius, this kind of like, this like, one family of love, we're thinking of this kind of Uranus type of energy. But we know that there's a Saturnian element as well. And we see like Saturn is, restriction, structure, imposing limits. It's authority. Authority is key. Authority is key. And this is where it's going to start getting like, we're dealing with like a variety of archetypical expressions, because Saturn from an astrological perspective is thought of, it's a real mixed bag, because Saturn is, it represents, where we face our limitations so that we can build up a structure and strength and discipline in order to be effective within Earth. That's what Saturn represents astrologically. And so like people with like positive Saturn placements, meaning like it's in a good sign or an easy sign, and it doesn't have like what would be called like hard aspects to difficult planets, if it's that is like Saturn will be your friend, and you're very disciplined, and the benefits, the karma of Saturn work in your benefit. And negative Saturn is like, this is where you're challenged and life is challenging, and this is where you get into like astrological perspective. But generally speaking, like, yes, Saturn is thought of as it used to be called one of the great malefic planets. It's also, particularly in more modern astrology, it's thought of as, it can be also very, very positive within human growth. And if you look back or if you want to look at it from a lens within the age of Aquarius, or with its relationship of Uranus, like Uranus is going to be a higher expression of a Saturnian quality. Saturn is really about structure and discipline. So it's like once Saturn is said to like have been established, then like, the higher qualities can flourish within it. That's one way of looking at this relationship between Saturn and Uranus. But that ain't the only Saturn. That ain't the only Saturn symbology, because probably if you're watching this, you're very familiar with Saturn death cult. You're understanding that traditionally Saturn and Satan, they're the same archetype. Or at least Satan came from Saturn. Whether you want to look at that from like a biblical perspective, and like in Hebrew, I believe Satan is known as the adversary. In astrology, Saturn represents opposition. It represents challenge, where you can grow. And, from that perspective, like, there's something about Saturn, which is, like, okay, yeah, this is important. This is my growth. I want to get strong. But then there's this other thing about like Saturnian, like death cults, and Satan being like, the bad Satan, not like the person who challenges you. And we look at the rulers of the world and the authoritative control, which is, has been around for a very long time. But what we are seeing right now right now in terms of what is happening worldwide is a Saturnian, is Saturnian in its darkest expression of total control and total authoritative, like, you're going to do it my way. And this is what we're seeing is at play right now. We're seeing this expression of the Age of Aquarius type of motif coming into, like, this is what's unfolding before our eyes. And we know, because we've just gone through this entire sort of presentation, I'm an hour into this, and it's like the Age of Aquarius, there's a lot of play to it. There's a lot of ways it can be expressed. And there are many ways which are very, very different from this Saturnian authoritative ways. And this is very much tying into the Age of Aquarius. We're going to get to that in a moment. So the last part of this particular part of the presentation, hopefully I could get this in about 5-10 minutes. This is what it's all about. So hopefully, you've stuck around. Like, this is the payoff. So why now? All right. So astrology's about timing and timekeeping. And so the Age of Aquarius, we talked about this in the beginning, when does it begin? When is this 2,160 year age end? There are all of these different explanations. Is it here? We know that the precession of the equinoxes tie into the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar, as we were told, was like supposedly ended. When did it end? Do I have it in here? The 2012 prophecy, we're told that's when it came to an end, regardless if it's exactly 2012 or 2020, and we're going to get to that in a moment. Like, we're seeing, like, there is put into the collective consciousness, like, there's all of these different dates, there's play, and we're dealing with this grand time period of 25,000, 26,000 years. So there's, like, that's beyond the human comprehension of time. It's an abstract. And if you've seen some of the other videos, this inception idea, this dream within the dream, this is what you do. You're building a dream that feels real, that there's an element of truth to it, but then there's also this certain expression. And so it's the timing, and that's what we're seeing right now. And that's why we're seeing this lockdown occur right now. So let's go understand why. Why now? There's we've seen multiple like movements towards this. And this is just one movement. It's a big one. We looked at, like, I talked about 1970 being a major change, particularly as it relates to the Age of Aquarius, and, like, the death of the Monterey Pop Festival. And then 1995 is the Age of the Aquarius, and that's the death of Jerry Garcia and the birth of Netscape in Silicon Valley. And then, this is happening on a 25-year increment. This is what the whole 100-year transition is about. I really, really recommend watching those videos, because this began 1945, first computer. 25 years later, first personal computer. 25 years later, we have the next iteration of the Age of Aquarius, 1995, and then 2020, 25 years after that, which is where we are, and which is when we're seeing this big change. And we can see these jumps happening on so many levels, as it relates to the Age of Aquarius and on these other sort of structured movements. And we can also see it with the heavens. And so remember, when we talked about Jupiter and Saturn, so right here, this is what we're going to call 0 degrees Aquarius. This is where a key beginning of Aquarius. And it gets really confusing, because the Age of Aquarius goes backwards in time. Like, the Age of Aquarius, because of the precession of the equinox, would really begin on 29 degrees, the end of Aquarius. but we're dealing with all these energies. It's something greater than three-dimensional thinking, but we can see what's happening. So coming in from this side is this other like trigger. And what this trigger is what we call the Great Conjunction. The Great Conjunction, a conjunction in astrology, is any time we have two planets in the same place in the heavens. And it's happening all the times, and they're known as transits. But what's known as the Great Conjunction is the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Great conjunctions occur regularly every 20 years, and they come from Jupiter's 12-year orbital period and Saturn's 30-year orbital period. And so from an astrological perspective, this is thought of as a big deal. Here we see, there have been some speculation that the so-called Star of Bethlehem was the Great Conjunction, this Saturn and Jupiter conjunction in the heavens. And so we know from astrotheology that the Star of Bethlehem is the symbol of the birth of the age of Pisces. So why is that significant? Because we just had a great conjunction. The Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn will occur December 21st, 2020. So not only is this conjunction happening, which is already significant, it is happening on a significant day, which is the solstice or winter solstice. And not only that, it is happening at, does it say it right here? I think I have it on, I thought I had the slide, but I guess I don't. But so it is happening. Oh, here it is. In December 2020, Saturn and Jupiter reach a conjunction. They're in the exact same place in the heavens, and that place is 0 degrees Aquarius. So whether or not that's the birth of the Age of Aquarius, again, we're seeing all of these different sort of definitions of when the birth of the Age of Aquarius could be. But I'll tell you what, it certainly leads to, from a ruling perspective, this is a key thing. It is both a great conjunction, the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. It is at the key location at 0 degrees Aquarius, and it is happening on a key date, which is December 21st, 2020, which is an equinox. And this is the closest Jupiter and Saturn's conjunction will be since 1623. And so that matters because this all ties into the Susquehanna mystery and when that began. We're not going to cover that here. That's the second part. But we can see how this is all lining up. And we can see right here, these are great conjunctions. These are the last times they have occurred. This just goes back through a 300-year period. And you can see these are the signs where it happens. And this is when, December 21st, 2020, this is when it's in Aquarius. We see that there is a significant timing of precession of the equinox, tied to Jupiter and Saturn. And we're seeing that Jupiter and Saturn's conjunction is happening at this 0 degrees Aquarius. And so this is in December 2012. Or 2019, excuse me. And at this same time is when look right here, 5 days later, there's a solar eclipse. All of these symbols are happening in the heavens. And this is exactly when we have the naming of this virus, which leads to this Saturnian expression of the Age of Aquarius. And one of the things I didn't say was Saturn, from astrology, is said to rule the earth. Saturn rules Capricorn. Like right now in modern astrology, Capricorn is the sign associated or ruled by Saturn, and Capricorn is called cardinal earth, the first earth sign, and cardinal signs are the rulers of the element. So Saturn rules rules earth. And from a biblical perspective, it is said that Satan rules the earth. Saturn and Satan, it's all about ruling the earth. And that is third dimension. And we've been told right here, and this is just a clue, we're not going to get into it, it is the fifth dimension, the higher dimension of Aquarius that we're interested in. This Aquarius, this higher expression, this Uranus expression of Aquarius is to the benefit of humanity. But what we're seeing being forced upon us through this dream is a Saturnian expression, and it is being tied. It is being tied. This is how you create the dream. This is how you create the dream, which is, it is tied to this, let's go and have all of this happen with the heavenly symbols of Saturn in Aquarius. And so even particular, Saturn enters Aquarius in March 2020. So astrology is confusing because, it is not just looked at from the Earth's stationary perspective, because the Earth is said to be in movement too. And so as these planets are in movement and we're in movement, that's how we get what's called retrograde. They appear to be moving backwards. So Saturn it was at 0 degrees Aquarius when the conjunction occurred, but then it moved back through retrograde, this appearance of moving backwards back into the previous sign, Capricorn, but then it re-entered for good in March as all of the Saturnian expression of Aquarius is happening. And I want to go back and I'm going to tie this up right now. Is, we're seeing this the last time Jupiter and Saturn were this close in conjunction was in 1623. And this puts us back in this time period of when this whole globalism, because globalism is a archetype of one expression of the human family. It's one expression. Globalisms, we're all connected. It may be an ugly way, but it is certainly Aquarius-like. This all began in this time frame with the birthplace of the United States, and this is all at this 1620s time period when Saturn and Jupiter were last conjunct. And, just pulling together this presentation, I came across this. The Pilgrims landed in 1620, which is exactly 400 years from 2020. This is what we're talking about. The Bible refers to an unfulfilled 400-year prophecy. 400 years is really, really, really significant. And I want to end with this last, let's see if I can find it. I hope I can. This last piece on astrology here and the Mayan calendar. And I'm looking for it. I can't seem to find it. Well, what it is it was a quote by Stephen Hawking, regardless of what and whom Stephen Hawking was or is. All right, I found it. Sorry about that. So Stephen Hawking. So, it was said back in 2012 that Stephen Hawking was based upon his calculations, the Mayans got it wrong. It's 2020. So again, it's Stephen Hawking. He is put out there by the same people who tell us our stories, So take that in consideration. He was I'm pretty certain he was a visitor of the Epstein Island. He was in that crowd one way or the other. He's also said to be the smartest guy who was alive, during this time period. And so he is linking 2020 to what the Mayan calendar is said to represent. And so again, now we're seeing multiple fingers from the same storytellers of collective culture that's saying 2020 is the year, and we're looking around and we're seeing it. And we can see how it ties in very much. We understand now, like, about Saturnian and Uranus type of archetypes, and how it ties in with the Age of Aquarius, and how we're seeing a specific expression is being hypnotized upon us. So it's with that I'm gonna wrap this up right now. This was a whole bunch of stuff, and part two, we're going to go back and we're going to look at the Susquehanna mystery, and we're going to see how this ties in and why it's so significant. And then the third part is going to be talking about, like, well, okay, well, you know, what are some I don't want to be the guy who tells anyone what to do, but I'm going to tell you what this makes sense to me, and how this translates in terms of a way to navigate this time period. So with that, my friends, thank you for your attention. This is it. It ain't going back. You don't put the genie back in the bottle. And if you're watching this, you have undoubtedly been preparing for this your entire life, and undoubtedly everything you need is in your backyard, literally and figuratively. So until part two, this is Mike. Have a good one.